This is the Renault Scenic. It's a new electric SUV with a huge range, a competitive price tag, and plenty of key ingredients that could make it better than a Tesla Model Y. So is this one of the best electric SUVs around? In this review, we're finding out. So, the Renault Scenic has been around since the 90s, and historically it was a kind of unfashionable MPV shaped a bit like a van. But this latest 5th generation model has morphed into a fully electric SUV. And really, this car has nothing at all in common with any previous version of the Scenic. Its positioning within Renault's lineup is still the same though. So this is a bigger and more practical alternative to the Renault Megane, which is also fully electric. And in terms of this car's direct rivals, this is a little bit smaller than things like the Kia EV6, the Skoda Enyaq and the Tesla Model Y, but it's still bigger than rivals like the Kia Niro EV. Inside the Scenic, you don't have an especially high up, tall SUV-like driving position. You're not as tall as a Model Y, but you are still higher up than you are in an EV6, which obviously for an electric SUV is fairly low slung. And the driving position generally is pretty good in the Scenic. You've got a good view down to the nose of the car, although this windscreen does seem a little shallow. You've also got big chunky pillars, and the view out the back isn't brilliant either, because you can see not only is the windscreen pretty small, but the headrests block quite a big chunk of it. However, you get front and rear parking sensors and a reversing camera as standard, and if you go for range-topping iconic trim, then you get a 360-degree camera, plus you get a digital rear view mirror, which essentially turns this into a live camera feed of what's happening out the back of the car. So if your view is completely blocked by passengers sat in the back, or you've got luggage piled up to the roof, then this helpfully still shows you what's happening out behind you, but it's only available on the top trim. Anyway, the driving position generally is good with loads of adjustment in the steering wheel and in the seat, but it is disappointing that this very nice 12.3-inch fully digital driver display is very easily blocked by the steering wheel. Now, it's not something that's going to be a problem for absolutely everyone, but we suspect lots of people will find that the top of the wheel cuts off a pretty big chunk of the screen, which is a shame. But there are still lots of good things about this driving position, because look at all these buttons that you have here, and these are not rubbish touch sensitive ones that aren't very simple to use. They do need a poke and a prod to push them into action. And over here, you've got 3 stalks, which initially looks and feels a bit overwhelming perhaps. But this is for your gear selector, this controls the windscreen wipers, of course, and this is something that Renaults have had for decades and controls certain functions of the media. So you can change the source of what you're listening to, you can turn up the volume, you can change the track or the radio station, and actually having all of these things so close to hand is really good while you're driving. Now, you can see next to the driver display on the central dashboard here, you've got a touchscreen infotainment system, which has this portrait layout. Now, it's mounted pretty low on the dashboard, so it doesn't get in your way of the view out of the car. But because it's also got this portrait layout, it means that if you're looking at the very bottom of the screen, you're taking your eyes pretty far from the road to see it. But it's not all bad, because this is angled slightly towards the driver, so it's within fairly easy reach. And also look at these glorious physical buttons at the bottom of the screen here. And this can easily adjust the temperature or the fan speed, and a Model Y doesn't have physical controls for that. And as we know, these are much better to use while you're driving than touchscreen infotainment systems. The system itself is responsive, it's got nice graphics, a relatively simple layout as well, plus you get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto as standard. And anyway, you have Google Maps and Google Assistant built in to Renault software. So it means you've got a brilliant sat-nav straight out of the box, and also a voice command system that actually works and can do things, which is also very helpful. Now, in terms of quality in here, this is actually pretty decent. You've got some nice padded fabrics on the dashboard. You've got some faux leather dotted around as well. It's not perfect throughout. So for example, this plastic down here is fairly hard and scratchy, doesn't feel that luxurious, but pretty much all the electric SUVs this is up against also have fairly inconsistent interiors. So this isn't the best electric SUV interior when it comes to quality, but it certainly mixes it with the best of the rest. And in terms of storage, this is really good. You've got good sized carpeted door bins. You've got this nicely padded big armrest here, which you can slide forwards to conceal this tray at the top of it, or lift up to reveal this massive cubby hole below it. And there's loads more storage down here as well. So all in all, not a perfect interior, but still lots of things that are very good about the Scenic up front. The rear seats are really very good because you've got loads of legroom here. You haven't got a great deal of space for your feet under the seat in front if it's in its lowest position, but headroom is also decent, and that is the case even if you're sat in this middle seat, which is raised slightly higher than the outer two rear seats, but it's still nicely padded underneath and for the backrest as well. And even with this sunroof fitted, it doesn't eat too much into the available headroom at all. Range-topping versions of the Scenic get this nifty tinted panoramic sunroof, and it's clever because you can change it from being opaque to transparent. And just as if it was a normal blind, you can have your rear passengers in shade, but still letting light through to the people up front. And it's also very useful for packaging reasons because there is no physical blind that you have to find space for in the roof to roll into. There are a couple of disappointing things to point out back here, and mainly it's the fact that these rear seats don't slide forwards or backwards, the seat backs don't recline, and that is a function that you get in lots of other electric SUVs. The only other disappointment is that the materials on the door here really don't feel particularly nice, but at least you've got some nice padding on the armrest here. And if you fold down this middle seat here, then you can see this rather luxurious arrangement that gives you a nicely padded armrest with two chunky cup holders. But lift this up and then you can reveal this carpeted storage tray with two USB-C ports to go with the two USB-C ports at the back of the center console there. And then you can fold this around to reveal another carpeted storage tray and this thing that lets you put your phone in to watch videos on a long journey. How good is that? The Scenic gets a 545 litre boot, which is a little bit bigger than the boots in an EV6 and an Ioniq 5. And in all three of those electric SUVs, we could fit 7 carry-on size suitcases into the boot below the parcel shelf. Now, a Tesla Model Y is more practical than all three of those electric SUVs because that could fit 9 carry-on size suitcases into the boot, plus it could swallow an entire extra suitcase in its front boot. The Scenic doesn't have a front boot at all, which is a shame. But the storage space that you have back here is a nice, simple, uniform shape. It's deep, but you do have this huge drop from the boot lip down to the boot floor. There are some versions available with a height adjustable boot floor, which gets rid of some of it, so it might be difficult to haul heavy things in and to get them out again. Plus, there is a very big underfloor storage compartment, which is a handy spot for the charging cables. There isn't, though, anywhere to store the parcel shelf within the boot itself, so you'll have to ditch that somewhere if you want to maximise the storage space and drop the rear seats, which split fold 40-20-40. And you release them using these pulleys up here. And you can see when they're down, if you don't have a height adjustable boot floor, there is a massive step up from the boot floor to the backs of those seats. But still, overall, this is a practical electric SUV. While we're back here though, let me just point out these door handles, because when they're in the bodywork like this, you can argue it looks quite clean and neat and sleek. However, if you want to actually open the door when they're like this, you've got to poke into this flappy handle bit here, then hook the handle out and try not to trap your finger in it when you do it, and then open the door, which is just very fiddly and frustrating, and you can imagine picking passengers up who just have no idea how to open that door. Now, they can pop out to make it slightly easier, but still, this doesn't seem any better at all than just a regular door handle. So the door handles aren't great, but the battery options are. And essentially there are two main versions of the Scenic that you can choose from. There's a comfort range model, which gets a 168 brake horsepower electric motor, a 60 kilowatt hour battery, and an official range of 260 miles. But there is also the long range Scenic, which gets a more powerful 215 brake horsepower electric motor, a much bigger 87 kilowatt hour battery, and a huge official range of 379 miles. So yes, there is a difference in power between the two models, but the official 0 to 62 mile an hour times are only separated by around half a second. So on the road, that's unlikely to be hugely noticeable. But what you will notice is the difference in range between the two cars. Now, admittedly, we haven't yet tested a comfort range Scenic, but we have done extensive tests on the long range Scenic, and we included it in a real world range test recently. If you want to see the video in full, then click on the link up there. But what we can reveal is that this Renault Scenic achieved 322 miles from a full charge until it died. And that is a really, really impressive result. In the same test, it also averaged 3.7 miles per kilowatt hour. And really, the distance that this car can travel on a full charge in real world driving conditions is a huge selling point for this car. And the official range that it has is longer than pretty much any of this car's direct rivals, even the Model Y, albeit only by a few miles. The Scenic isn't quite so outstanding when it comes to charging speeds because the maximum charging rate that this can accept in long range form is 150 kilowatts, which is slightly faster than some rivals, but other alternatives do offer much faster maximum charging speeds. It means that in perfect conditions, the quickest you can get from 10 to 80% is around 40 minutes. For the comfort range model, the maximum charging rate that can accept is 135 kilowatts, and it will get from 10 to 80% in around about the same time, because even though the maximum charging rate is lower, the battery is smaller. Now, it's not just the range which is good about the Scenic on the road. This has clearly been set up to be a soft, comfortable car, and the ride that it delivers is indeed soft and comfortable. It's more comfortable than an EV6, which by electric SUV standards is pretty firm. It's also more supple than a Model Y, and generally, it's a nice car to do some miles in. Now, if you are on some particularly broken up, uneven roads, then it can be a little bit unsettled. But for the most part, this delivers a calm and soft ride. And it's also really quiet in here. There's pretty much no whine at all from the electric motor. There's not much wind noise or road noise, and it's noticeably quieter on the motorway than the rivals that this is up against. The downside to that is this has not been set up to be a particularly agile car. So if you go around a corner quickly, accelerate hard out of it, then you'll notice a lot of body lean. You'll also even notice a bit of torque steer with the wheel wriggling around in your hand a bit as you accelerate hard. But when you're driving normally, there is very little to complain about the way that this car handles. The worst thing about the Scenic on the road is the brake pedal, because it is very, very spongy and inconsistent in the way that it reacts. So it does unfortunately mean that stopping this car smoothly is actually very difficult to do. And lots of other electric SUV rivals have firmer and more consistent brake pedals. But still, that isn't really enough to ruin overall what is a very good electric SUV on the road. And what about the price? Well, an entry-level Scenic costs a similar amount to an entry-level Enyaq, and that means that it's considerably cheaper than an Ioniq 5, an EV6, a Tesla Model Y, and even if you go for a bigger battery version of this car, then this still looks like good value compared to its rivals. There are 3 trim levels to choose from, and the lineup starts with entry-level Techno trim, which you can have with either battery size. And you get things like 19-inch alloys, adaptive cruise control, a heated steering wheel, heated front seats, and ambient interior lighting, all as standard. So, especially for an entry-level trim, it's very well equipped. The top 2 trims, Esprit Alpine and Iconic, are only available with the bigger battery, long-range versions of the Scenic. And if you go for Esprit Alpine, then you get bigger 20-inch alloys, but basically all the other changes are cosmetic, including some blue highlights in the interior. Range-topping Iconic trim adds a panoramic sunroof, a park assist function, and a massaging driver's seat. But it obviously pushes the price up quite a bit. So really, entry-level Techno is so well equipped, most people will be best off looking there. Renault really was a trailblazer for electric cars. It released the Zoe long before many other manufacturers had even thought about their first EV, but it didn't really build on its momentum from there. It was a long time before we saw the fully electric Megane after that. And while that is a good EV, it doesn't really stand out compared to the strong competitors that it's up against. This Scenic though really does, and it bodes very well for the upcoming wave of fully electric Renaults on the way. The Scenic has a fantastic real-world range. The big battery version especially looks surprisingly good value, and it's just a nice thing to sit in and to drive. So if you're looking for an electric SUV, this should definitely be on your shortlist. Thanks very much for watching this review. If you want to see another one, then click up there and make sure you subscribe to our channel as well. And if you want to read our extended written review of the Scenic and every other new and used car around, then click on that link to go to whatcar.com.